Madam Vice Chair, can you see the presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair White and members of the Commission. Today I am here to brief the Commission on the Baltimore-Washington Maglev NEPA study and to seek support for our proposed staff comments and recommendations on the draft environmental impact statement, which we will send to the Federal Railroad Administration prior to the end of the public comment period on May 24th. In addition to our preliminary staff comments, we will also include any other comments that we hear today from Commission members in our letter. The first part of my presentation will be a high-level overview of the Maglev project, which is short for magnetic levitation, and then I will summarize our comments related to the study's purpose and need, range of study alternatives, and impacts to federal and district property. So here's the general Maglev corridor and its relationship to the National Capital Region, situated partially within our review area, within the District of Columbia and Prince George's Counties, Maryland. The proposed guideway alignment would span between 33 and 36 miles in length between downtown Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland. The Maglev would operate as a frictionless train held within its guideway by a series of powerful magnets with the capability of achieving a top speed of 311 miles per hour, which would enable a one-way 15-minute trip between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. Here's the purpose for the study: to evaluate and ultimately construct and operate a safe, revenue-producing, high-speed ground transportation system that achieves the optimum operating speed of the Maglev technology. And this is to significantly reduce travel time to meet the capacity and ridership needs of the Baltimore-Washington region. In addition, the draft EIS shows a number of objectives relating to transportation redundancy, connectivity, economic growth, and complementary service within the region. As described in the EIS, the project is intended to address issues and challenges with increasing population and employment, growing demands on the existing transportation network, increasing travel times and decreasing mobility, and maintaining regional economic viability. The federal elements of the comprehensive plan include policies that support transportation, as well as policies that encourage preservation and protection of our region's park network, forested areas, historic cultural resources, and parkways, all of which relate to the Maglev project. In addition, our commission represents the interests of a number of potentially affected jurisdictions and federal properties, including the U.S. Secret Service's Rowley Training Center, Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, or BARC, Baltimore-Washington Parkway, Goddard Space Flight Center, and the District of Columbia. Per the National Capital Planning Act, our commission would have approval authority for future building and site development on federal property within the district, an advisory authority over district property, and federal property outside of the district. The draft EIS shows the temporary use of several National Park Service reservations along New York Avenue during the construction phase with no permanent use. However, the new Maglev facility would require permanent development of several federal campuses in the BW Parkway outside of the district in Prince George's County, Maryland. The Maglev study is led by the Federal Railroad Administration with a number of participating, cooperating, and coordinating district and federal agencies. And then once in place, the Maglev facility would be owned and operated as a for-profit service by a private firm known as Northeast Maglev. This is the second Maglev presentation to the Commission, with the first presentation made to NCPC in January 2019 by the project consultants. As shown on the timeline, the draft EIS is currently available for public review and comment, with all comments due to the Federal Railroad Administration by May 24th. Once the comment period concludes, FRA will review and consider all comments, select a preferred alternative, and publish a final EIS and record of decision in early 2022. After that, the Maglev would be constructed in sections over the next 7 years between 2023 and 2030. Here is the proposed Maglev route extending between downtown Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland, with 2 fixed station locations, one in downtown Washington, D.C., and one at BWI Airport in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. And then FRA will select a third station location within the city of Baltimore, either in the Cherry Hill neighborhood or Camden Yards section of the city. And this Baltimore location will be identified in the final EIS as part of the study's preferred alternative. Here's a concept rendering of the downtown Washington station taken from the draft EIS. And this would be located, the Washington, D.C. station would be located under New York Avenue with 3 different station entrances. One in a new head house building constructed between 5th and 6th Streets along the south side of New York Avenue. And then 2 other entrances would be along the north side of New York Avenue, one near 4th Street and one near 1st Street. As part of the new station head house development, there would also be an underground garage with 1,000 spaces intended for use by Maglev staff and riders. From downtown Washington, the Maglev guideway would extend to the northeast in an underground tunnel for approximately 12 miles until it reaches outside the Beltway in Prince George's County, where it would gradually rise up to ground level and emerge through a portal facility on Baltimore-Washington Parkway property. And then once above ground, the guideway would rise up into an elevated viaduct that ranges in elevation between 125 and 165 feet above ground level. And here I would like to point out that there are currently 2 different alignment alternatives that are still under consideration. One alignment, known as the J alternative or Parkway East alternative, would align along the east side of the BW Parkway, shown here in light blue. And the other alignment, known as the J1 alternative or west alignment, would align along the Parkway's west side, shown here in magenta. The west alignment would run above the ground for a distance of between 5 to 6 miles, or 17% of the guideway's entire length. And the eastern alignment would run above ground for 8 to 9 miles, or 25% of its total length. As the National Park Service's Parkway property ends at the Prince George's-Anne Arundel County line, the elevated viaduct would span a more limited distance of approximately 4 miles along Park Service property. In addition to the guideway, other project elements would include one 180 to 200 acre train maintenance facility site. And the draft EIS is currently considering 3 potential sites for this, 2 of which would be located on BARC campus property within the National Capital Region. And these are identified here by the 2 yellow dots. The third potential location is in Anne Arundel County near the BW Parkway interchange with Maryland Route 198. And as the Maglev would only need one of these sites to support its operation, FRA will identify their preferred maintenance facility site in the future final EIS document. Finally, the Maglev will require 2 air intake emergency egress structures along the tunneled guideway section, with one in the district and the other in Prince George's County, and then several other air intake emergency egress structures would locate along the tunnel section closer to Baltimore as well, which is outside of our area of review jurisdiction. Each of these structures are anticipated to look like 50-foot tall buildings, and the EIS indicates that these structures would be designed for compatibility to the surrounding environment. And here's a slide that shows a compilation of all of the key project elements, both within the National Capital Region, shown here in color, and elements located outside of the region, which are shown here in gray. The EIS includes 12 different build alternatives, which are all reflected here in this matrix, and this is based on the different combinations of station locations, multiple potential train maintenance facility sites, and 2 different parkway alignments still under consideration. The draft EIS contains numerous matrices such as this to convey potential temporary and permanent impact ranges, broken down by topic area and some by property ownership. So that concludes my overview of the project, and now I will highlight our staff comments and draft recommendations, the majority of which focus on federal property and district impacts. However, we also remain unclear about the real benefits of the project given its potential for significant impacts to a wide variety of federal activities in the region. Starting with the project's purpose, need, and objectives, The draft EIS appears to make the case for some of these that relate to the Maglev's potential for positive economic impacts and the project's potential to create another redundant transportation facility in the region. Here is an EIS ridership forecast table that shows a majority of Maglev's future ridership as being from travelers who currently drive between Baltimore and Washington, which is positive. However, in terms of the Maglev as a more traditional complementary form of public transportation, which is widely available to the traveling public, we note that there are several key differences between the Maglev and other services such as Amtrak, MARC, and commuter bus, including the Maglev's $60 average one-way fare, which would make this high-speed service less accessible than Amtrak, MARC, and commuter bus. We note that comparison sample one-way fares average $30 for Amtrak's regional service with a low of $15 for a one-way fare, as well as a one-way fare of $8 for MARC Rail. In addition, the draft EIS states that the Maglev would reduce future MARC ridership within the study area by over 30%, and Amtrak ridership by 94%. And these declines would require Amtrak and MARC to lower their service levels in response. Thus, the expectation that Maglev would compete with these more traditional public transportation services appear to be contrary to the intent of the Maglev project as a complementary public transportation mode. As shown here on this slide, Amtrak currently has plans to improve its system through future corridor improvements between Washington, D.C. and Boston, and these improvements could be undertaken to improve service in the Baltimore-Washington area in a much less disruptive way to local, federal, and private property. Finally, the current Maglev study scope of between 33 and 36 miles is relatively limited compared to a longer distance facility that would run up to New York City or Boston, which may increase the utility of the high-speed service. As federal planners, we must consider all of these factors when assessing the benefit of the Maglev project, especially since the draft EIS shows significant physical and planning costs to federal properties in the region, and I'll highlight these in more detail throughout the remainder of my presentation. Regarding the study's alternative alignment selection process, we note that the Federal Railroad Administration started with an initial set of 16 alignment options for the Maglev within the study area, and based on general criteria and conceptual impact information, FRA selected 2 alternative alignments to carry into the ongoing, more detailed NEPA study, both of which rely heavily on the permanent use of Baltimore-Washington Parkway property and other federal campuses in the study area. Thus, no matter which alternative is selected, federal planning, security, research, and other uses, as well as the historic nature and setting of the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, would be permanently affected. In order to broaden the study, should neither of the build options prove to be feasible, once federal facility and master plans, programming, and mitigation are better understood, we continue to recommend that FRA add 1 or more additional Maglev alignments to the NEPA study for greater planning flexibility. Potential project impacts appear to be significant both to federal properties within the region and other properties within the larger study area outside of our area of review jurisdiction. And these include the Patuxent Wildlife Research Refuge, Fort Meade, and National Security Administration Campus. Of particular concern are physical impacts to recreational facilities and parklands, view sheds, water resources, ecological resources such as forests and farmland soils. And while it may be possible to lessen these impacts to an extent, their magnitude would likely make it impossible to fully mitigate in a meaningful way. So one key recommendation that we have is that prior to the selection of the preferred Maglev alternative, we urge FRA to continue to work with affected federal and district stakeholders to develop more specific impact and mitigation information, to use this information to resolve outstanding planning issues related to federal and district property, and to reflect this additional development and coordination in the final EIS and record of decision. Next, I will highlight more specific impacts and concerns for each of the potentially affected federal properties along the Maglev corridor, as well as some specific concerns from district planners as well. Starting with the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, here are the potential Maglev alignments along either side of the Parkway. And EIS materials show a range of permanent impacts to the Parkway's aesthetics, visual quality, historic setting, and Parkway properties' ecological resources, such as its linear, contiguous, forested areas. In addition, tens of acres would also be directly affected through construction impacts, and although these activities would be temporary, the land would be occupied for several years, and new trees and vegetation proposed as mitigation could take up to 75 to 100 years to fully mature according to the draft EIS. NCPC's comprehensive plan recognizes visual and physical encroachment as a threat to the scenic and pastoral qualities of our region's parkways. And the best way to protect BW Parkway land would be to completely avoid its use altogether, either through additional tunneling or by using another alignment that is completely outside of the Parkway property. Moving on to BARC, both alignments would significantly impact the campus, with greater impacts should one of the BARC sites be developed as a 200-acre train maintenance facility. In particular, there are concerns with potential impacts to sensitive wetlands, stormwater management, multiple ongoing research programs, and increased polluted stormwater runoff on BARC property, which is especially relevant considering the campus's agricultural research mission. In addition, the large size of and placement of the maintenance facility would eliminate a number of potential future solar array sites, thereby threatening this BARC sustainable energy program. In particular, the EIS states that the airstrip maintenance site east of the Parkway would impact the area's unique setting, which could not be replaced elsewhere on BARC, with research functions no longer available and years of ongoing research possibly lost or altered for a very long time. We note that while the EIS does include a chapter that describes the Maglev's compatibility to local county and district planning and zoning, the EIS does not currently include an assessment of how the project would affect BARC's future planned land uses, development, or programming. So as shown on this slide, one of our key recommendations is for FRA to collect this more detailed planning information for BARC and other potentially affected federal properties, and to use this information to assess these more defined impacts, to develop mitigation, and then to base the preferred alternative on minimizing disruption to federal plans in the area to the maximum extent feasible. But until we have this more detailed operational and planning information, we cannot see the selection of a realistic preferred alternative. Moving to the south, potential impacts to the Goddard Space Flight Center would be less than those to NPS property or BARC, but with greater impacts should FRA select the BW Parkway East alternative and or develop the airstrip train maintenance facility site, which would directly affect ongoing NASA research. Specifically, there are concerns related to potential vibrational, electromagnetic, and lighting interference to NASA's geophysical and astronomical observatory facility, which is located on land leased from BARC adjacent to the airstrip site. In addition, campus access from the BW Parkway would also be impacted during project construction. So again, as previously stated, the Federal Highway or Railroad Administration should use the Goddard Space Flight Center campus plan to assess potential real impacts to campus operations and future projects, and to develop appropriate mitigation prior to selection of the preferred alternative and prior to release of the final EIS and record of decision. To the north of BARC, with its location along the east side of the BW Parkway, the U.S. Secret Service's Rowley Training Center would experience greater impacts with the selection of the Parkway East alternative than with the west alignment. Based on the Secret Service's security-related mission, its need for training space on campus, and planned future projects, there are concerns related to the project's potential impacts to campus security, as well as noise, vibration, and electromagnetic interference and stormwater runoff. Previous coordination notes state that the center would not be able to cede any land for the project, which again reinforces the importance of considering future federal plans as the study continues. Related to the District of Columbia, district planners have expressed overarching concerns based on a lack of detail provided in the draft EIS, and related to the Federal Railroad Administration's previous elimination of other potential maglev station locations within the city. When these other station sites may have been preferable to the current Mount Vernon East location, and the EIS's consideration of only one station site has made it more difficult for planners to understand the real magnitude of the potential project impacts on the city. Other concerns include potential operational impacts to New York Avenue during construction as a major city transportation corridor, the potential new 1,000 space garage, despite other nearby potential parking opportunities in the district's effort to minimize parking in the city, and the fact that there are no direct underground connections to Metro Rail, which was one of the reasons for eliminating previous NOMA station locations. And NCPC staff are fully supportive of these comments, and we will support these and other district comments in our final letter as we continue to coordinate with district planning staff. So before I close, here are some key recommendations that we will convey to the Federal Railroad Administration in our comment letter. To continue to develop more specific mitigation with specific locations, since the draft EIS does not currently contain this information. To add one or more non-parkway alignments to broaden the study, should neither of the two current options prove to be feasible, once federal plans, programming, and mitigation are better understood, and to collect more detailed planning information before selecting the preferred alternative, since FRA should seek to minimize the disruption to existing and future federal plans and operations in the region. Regarding next steps, NCPC staff will finalize our comment letter based on today's meeting and send that to the Federal Railroad Administration prior to the end of the public comment period. FRA will then review all public and agency comments received, and then they plan to select a preferred maglev alternative and release a final EIS and record a decision in early 2022. In addition, over the next few months, the FRA and the maglev team have agreed to come in and provide a follow-up information presentation to our commission to address any questions and concerns that members may express at today's meeting. So that concludes my presentation, and I am now available to respond to any questions from commission members at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weil, for such a thorough presentation. I'll now open it up to the commission for discussion, starting with Commissioner Cash and then going in a round robin format.
Can I also ask Mr. Weil, thank you, to take the screen down?
Yeah. Thank you. Commissioner Cash, if you would like to offer any comments or questions?
Well, I'm very thankful for the staff's work on addressing the district's concerns in here. I think that there's a lot of outstanding questions that need to be asked about this. I have a lot of concerns about the impacts, especially here in downtown. But on the project itself, I guess I'll go with the old adage: if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say it at all. So I'll do that.
I'm sure your mother would be proud of that statement, Mr. Cash. Thank you, Commissioner Chang.
Thank you for the presentation. I have no further comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Ginsburg. Maybe we'll come back. I'm not sure if Commissioner Ginsburg can hear us.
No comments from me. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. I see that Commissioner Trueblood joined us. So Commissioner Trueblood, welcome. Any comments?
Thank you. I guess maybe it's a question. I think thank you very much for the presentation. It summed up, I believe, many of our thoughts so far. But my question, you had mentioned earlier NCPC's approval authority over New York Avenue, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that looks like and what we should be anticipating our role in that review and approval in the future.
Well, yeah, at this time, it looks like first of all, our commission would have approval authority over federal property within the district. And at this time, the draft EIS shows a number of National Park Service reservations along New York Avenue as being temporarily impacted during the construction phase. The draft EIS explains that these reservations would be returned back to their existing state once the construction phase was complete. So that's where our approval authority would be.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, I guess I'll just say, I have a number of questions probably better suited for the project sponsor. So I look forward to that presentation.
Thank you. Commissioner McMahon.
I appreciate the staff's work. I enjoyed the presentation. Looking forward to future discussions on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner May.
I have comments, but I have a lot of background noise at the moment. So if somebody else could go, and I'll try to clear that up here.
Okay. Commissioner Argo.
Hi. I'm kind of bowled over. It's a huge, it's a huge project with potentially huge impacts, that I think, you clearly touched on. I appreciate it's a huge amount of work, I'm sure has gone into this and will continue to go on into this project, and really appreciate how the staff has dived in and given us, given us the overview, but also being very clear about where the key issues will be, not just for the commission, but for other authorities as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Wright.
Okay, I keep getting
no questions or comments at this point. Did I go out of turn? Sorry, I don't have any questions or comments. It's kind of overwhelming. I remember seeing it the last time. People talk a lot about how we are not competitive in this realm with other countries, and I don't know how they get it done because there's so many things that can impede the progress of a project like this. That was extremely thorough. I find it overwhelming to think about what would need to happen to bring this project to fruition. Wow. So I'll just leave it at that. And I guess what will be our next, what's the next step? And in the end, I said I wasn't going to comment or ask a question. What entity is the final decision maker when we really get to mitigation and all this stuff? I mean, I'm sort of unclear on the decision tree on this, which is an unfair question, Mike. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I believe this is fairly similar to the famous managed lanes project, where the Federal Railroad Administration technically is the lead agency, but they are also working very closely with the Maryland Department of Transportation. And basically, once they wrap up the study with a selection of a preferred alternative, which they will publish through the final environmental impact statement and ROD. I believe mitigation, the plan right now is to develop mitigation up to a certain point, and then to continue refine that mitigation as kind of the plans are developed into more detailed engineering plans. And I would guess that would be done in conjunction with the Maglev firm, who will be operating the project and who will own the service. So those are the next steps. One of our recommendations is to kind of basically slow the process down so that we can get as much detailed information, not only on impacts, but also mitigation before a preferred alternative is really selected. So again, we can make more of these planning decisions before we get into more detailed design.
Madam Chair White, I'm just going to add that those are next steps with regard to the environmental impact statement process, but then it's maybe it's fairly obvious, but you know, there's a lot of discussions that have to happen with all the landholding agencies as well. And so maybe that's a good segue to Peter's comments.
That's a very important point. I'm glad you added that. Commissioner May, are you available to speak now? Or should we move on to Commissioner Dixon?
No, I'm good. I can talk now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I appreciate the presentation. It was very thorough, but boy, it only touches the surface of what we're all grappling with on this project. I mean, my history on this goes all the way back to the very beginning. It's been more than 4 years since we started having meetings on this topic, through all of the different alternatives and all of the potential impacts of those. And I will note at that time that the plan was to release the draft EIS in the winter of 2018. And so I don't know if that meant December of 2018 or January of 2018. In any case, it's now 2021. It's several years behind, and I think it's going to continue to move more slowly than scheduled. I'd be very surprised if they can get all the way to a final EIS in the early next year, but you know, we'll see what happens. First of all, I will say, you know, we have been talking directly with the FRA and have reviewed earlier drafts of what's in the draft EIS, and so everything that I'm saying today is not news to FRA. They already know what our concerns are. As noted in the presentation, there are multiple Park Service properties and DOI properties that are involved here. We have the two large Park Service parks, Greenbelt Park and of course the Parkway. 14 L'Enfant reservations are affected, and of course the Patuxent Research Refuge is also a DOI property. And we are coordinating the Park Service with DOI on all of the comments, and they'll receive a single comment letter from DOI. We're concerned about the, I think in the big picture, the concern is that we're not sure how this can actually happen, given the constraints of federal agencies involved, particularly the Department of the Interior, which is what we know. I'm not sure what the path forward is, because what's being proposed is a set of impacts that are so substantial. I mean, more substantial than anything that I have seen in my Park Service career, and that at this point includes the managed lane study, which is, you know, has been throttled back to the point where the effects are more manageable on Park Service land. I mean, this is the biggest thing, and when you get to that scale, some of the tools that are available for federal decision making aren't necessarily available to you. So it's complicated. I'm not sure how this can happen. We'll see as we, you know, move further along and communicate further with FRA. I will say there are, you know, the way the alternatives have been eliminated up to this point, and we're down to basically both sides of the Parkway, I think is problematic, and you know, the level of impact of those alternatives has gotten more extensive as the design has been refined. So I'm grateful that NCPC is speaking up for adding back some of the prior alternatives, or just adding alternatives generally, because I think that that's necessary. It's also an option conceivably that they could put the entire structure underground. I mean, most of it is already underground, So I don't know if there's, how seriously the, how viable it is to just keep the entire thing underground, because then we're talking about a much different set of impacts and frankly more manageable. As it is envisioned right now, the maglev train will come out of the ground along the Parkway and run parallel to it for somewhere between 6 and 10 miles. Now, the National Park Service operates 19 miles of the Parkway, so conceivably half of the Parkway will be substantially affected by this road, by this elevated viaduct. And I think you saw some good images of what this thing is going to look like. So this is, even though it says 90 acres of impact, that's 90 acres of construction and footprint. It is not 90 acres out of the 1,400 that, where you can see it. It is, 30 to 50% of the Parkway and its view sheds, the things that make it a parkway and not just a highway, will be diminished by this construction. I also think I don't know if it's not well covered within the DEIS, but there are substantial below grade impacts as well. I don't know how they are calculated in some of the acreage counts and things like that, but I do want to make sure that NCPC staff is fully aware and are raising the appropriate questions when it comes to what's accounted for within the EIS. Frankly, a lot of the looking beyond the Department of Interior's perspective on this, I am very concerned about the other impacts that this will have with the large ventilation structures, the stations at both ends, a 200-acre maintenance facility planted within the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. That's really a huge structure. And if it's on the, if the alignment chosen is on the west side of the Parkway, then that means that the maglev train will be flying over the Parkway to get to the park, conceivably. So, there's just any number of concerns that we have. Again, all of this stuff is information that we have previously shared with FRA, and we'll be putting some version of this into writing before the end of the comment period. And I do appreciate the NCPC staff analysis on this and agree with the comments that have been registered so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner May. Commissioner Dixon.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, the technology, and having been on a maglev from, I think, the airport into Hong Kong, it's really special. But I guess the question I have is the juice going to be worth the squeeze, or is the result going to be worth the damage of what's going to be done? I also feel that there's a lot happening with who's going to be the rider, or who's going to be on this. There are fewer and fewer, more and more of us are doing work from home. There's a lot of other transportation options. 15 minutes is good to get to Baltimore, but I'm questioning, whether that result is really something that's going to mean something to us in 20 years. I wish we could upgrade our existing rail where there are already right-of-ways to be able to handle this kind of thing, rather than have to build some other new structure over top and cause all the disruption. If the time could be spent trying to convert those right-of-ways into a faster one, maybe even maglev, rather than you have to build a whole new one. Obviously, there's going to be a lot thought going into this, and I'm excited by it. But it's a lot of things excite us, but do we really want to go through the intrusion to our land and to our area? So we'll have to wait and see. Looking forward.
Thank you so much for those comments. Hearing all this, I just want to go back for a second and really reflect on what our job is as the Regional Planning Commission for Federal Land. And the thoughtful analysis by the staff and fellow commissioners in really digging into the impacts of this project, looking at it in a really careful, critical way, and then asking the big questions. And I think that's our job. And I think, I know I want to compliment the staff, as everyone has, and putting this out there. And the other part of this, going back to our public outreach and engagement efforts, it's so important for the public to have good visuals to understand what this is going to mean to their communities. So the visuals that you include on the visual vegetation impacts, what happens along the Parkway, is really important for the public to understand. So I so appreciate that we not only do this work, but we do it in public, in the spirit of helping analyze what these trade-offs are. I mean, our comprehensive plan policies encourage non-single occupancy vehicle transportation systems, but with this one, obviously, there are lots of trade-offs. I do question, I love the way Commissioner Dixon put it, is the juice going to be worth the squeeze? And I think as a society, that is what we have to do in looking at these projects. As Commissioner Wright noted earlier, COVID has an impact on transportation and how we travel and use these systems. The competition to public transportation and the equity issues that are involved in these decisions are serious and really need careful review. Commissioner May, I'm really glad that you've shared with us what the status of your conversations are with the Federal Railroad Administration. This is a really important project for our review. So thank you for that. And I look forward to having the Federal Railroad Administration and the Maglev team come back to the Commission to answer all these questions, discuss the project further. And I hope everyone who is in the public who's participating and watching the meeting today will go and review the presentation and the materials that our staff has put together and take a look at what this will mean for your communities. So if there are no other questions or comments from the Commission members, we will conclude our open session agenda, but I didn't want to cut that off if someone had an additional comment or question. Well, thank you, Mr. Weil, for your presentation and good work. So this concludes. Commissioner Argo, did you want to make an additional comment? Okay, thank you. This concludes our open session agenda. The Commission will next meet on Thursday, June 3rd at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And if there is no other business, the open session is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.